Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. Keith, hi. How you doing, man? You've been really busy this week. I'm sure it's probably really good for you to sit down and talk some Seahawks football.
Oh yeah, I've been needing the break, chance to sit down and talk some Seahawks with you. I've been moving, and moving sucks. So it's been a stressful couple of days, but I'm in the new place, in my new studio, which sounds terrible because there's a lot of echo.
Yeah, we'll get that figured out.
I have to figure out how to get rid of that before next week. But yeah, it's been fun. But I'm here, and God, I need a chance to sit and talk football with you, Bill. It's been something I've needed.
The last time we got together and talked, it just seems like it's been forever ago, like a completely different house and completely different life. And now you're here, and here we are. So the cool thing is, Keith, in today's show, we get to talk about the fact that you actually went to a training camp. You sat up on the berm. You moved around a little bit. You watched some specific position groups. We're going to have that conversation. So that's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and it was a long camp practice too. Usually they run about 2 hours. This one ran about 2 hours and 45 minutes.
And you and I haven't even had a chance to talk about it at all. So I'm just totally jazzed. In fact, we were on before we actually started recording. I completely forgot that you went, and I was running through what we were going to talk about. And he was like, "Well, I actually did go to camp," and I was like, "Oh yeah, we have to talk about that." Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of those things where getting a chance to actually watch the players makes a big deal. You get to see a lot of things, a lot of little details that just you can't see as well when you're watching the feed online, and some of the stuff that happens, a little bit away from the play, and watching the coaches teach, and you can get some insight there, and yeah, there's so much more to learn when you're actually at the practice.
So we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. I think first, just wanted to share a couple of housekeeping things, important dates ahead that we're looking at as we move through towards the regular season beginning, which is the second week of September. August 17th, the roster needs to be reduced to 85 players. August 24th, reduced to 80 players. And then the 31st at 1 p.m., the roster gets down to 53. And we're going to have some shows around those as well to talk about some of those cuts and some of the roster prediction stuff that we like to do every year around that. And then they also get to form the practice squad on September 1st, plus the international player. We think that's going to be Donker. Who else could it possibly be? I don't know. Maybe Lestage, since he's from Canada. Other than that, I think Donker is the assigned international player that they have that they can have that exemption for on the practice squad. Okay, so that's all we really have. There's, Jamal Adams is still out there not practicing. The good news is he is at camp. They're probably working out details. I would imagine he probably would not be at camp if they were far apart. I would imagine that they're just hammering out little things that are really important to him. And
the reason why he's not practicing actually isn't
absolutely
related to any of that. He had surgery on both shoulders and on a hand during the off season. So he is still recovering a little bit. They're working him in slow. Pete Carroll said that they could get him out there and play him, but they just don't want to risk re-injury or having like a hamstring or something come up. So they're getting
that would be a nightmare to have that going on while you're renegotiating a contract. So
they're bringing him along slowly and making sure that he is ready to go week one, fully healthy, fully in shape, all of that. So no real concern with any of that.
So yesterday, Shane Waldron and Pete Carroll gave little pressers, not a lot of information, just kind of reconfirming everything that we are seeing, and kind of tying into what you saw. He mentioned, Shane Waldron did, how hard the offensive line is working in getting to their spots. Everybody looks good. Running back group as a whole, his working relationship with Russell Wilson is developing, and feels really confident in that. So it was interesting to kind of hear him talk. He's just a positive guy that seems very competent when he's relaying the information there. Pete Carroll, again, is Pete Carroll. He's going to talk about almost everybody in glowing terms. The only thing that, he mentioned some players, specifically Freddie Swain. He gave an Eskridge update on his, I think it's his toe.
Yep.
Apparently he was fitted with some new shoes. He had a workout yesterday, ran some sprints, no problems, no pain whatsoever. So now they're going in conditioning mode, getting him ready to get introduced into practice. So he's still probably a week away. He's going to miss the training camp live scrimmage at Lumen Field this Saturday. But no big deal. I think that he's been a part of the workouts. He's standing on the field. He's watching reps. He's listening to coaches. So hopefully he's not missing too much there. Penny Hart, he's mentioned a ton, the tight end group, Cedric Abuahe. Some of these players we can talk about as our conversation goes on today, but I just thought it was interesting to listen to those guys talk about different guys. But let's get to on the ground. On the ground reporter Keith Myers had a training camp visit this last weekend, and let's dive in.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of my time watching the defensive backs in part because the defense was on the near field and the offense was at the far field at the start of practice, and also because it was the last non-pads day, so they were just in shells. And so just watching that, you can't get as much out of watching the linemen when they can't hit people and that kind of stuff. So, just spending my time watching a lot of the defensive backs, and there's some interesting stuff. One is Akela Witherspoon is the best cornerback in camp. At least he was that day, and it wasn't that close.
That's a consistent thing that we've been hearing.
Yeah, he is really sticky in coverage. He's does a great job, makes the play on the ball. When he was covering DK Metcalf, the offense struggled a little bit. And when he wasn't, when someone else was in there, it was like it wasn't if the offense was going to score, it was just how easily. Because it was, Wilson would complete 3 or 4 passes. At least half of them were to DK Metcalf, and they would march down the field.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel good about that or if I feel bad about that. It's like you're happy for DK. That's going to be a given, on quite a few different Sundays. But to know that we don't have anybody else depth-wise behind Witherspoon to do anything to affect that is a little bit concerning. But
yeah. But in that there were some interesting other things going on, like Ryan Neal was in playing the part of was he playing the part of Blair, and Blair was playing the part of,
that's what I heard,
of Adams, or
yeah.
Was he just playing the part of Adams? Because the way that those guys interchanged in terms of their assignments and what they were doing, it was hard to tell whether Blair was being Blair and Neal was being Adams, or whether Blair was being Adams and Neal was being Blair. Like,
that's just so exciting to me, because that just shows the diversity that we've got on this roster, especially at that position, at the safety position, up in the box. I think that we just have a ton of options there when you add in, Jordan's athleticism, Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner. Obviously, that area of the field, that middle center close up to the line of scrimmage there, is just going to be so tough for offenses to be able to do anything after this thing kind of gets into a groove.
Yeah. And so one of the things that was really interesting about that is that, you'd see the offense would come out in a certain formation, send someone in motion, and you'd see, rather than the Seahawks stay in a kind of a base set, you'd see Witherspoon actually follow, and then Ryan Neal would come up to the person who's now the outside corner or outside wide receiver, who started out in the slot, and come up in press coverage, like
so
the
they're just completely comfortable switching at personnel and no problem.
Yeah, and so
that's amazing.
They bring Neal up, and he'd be in press coverage. And basically he took over the responsibility of the outside corner, so that way Witherspoon could follow his assignment. And it was just little wrinkles like that it was very un-Pete Carroll to see, but very interesting to me to watch those rotations and
Pete Carroll's always been really adaptive, depending on personnel and stuff. So, I mean, when he has the right people that he trusts can do the job, he's totally open, I think, to that. And I'm excited to see that, actually, because that is a big difference. You always used to see guys playing out of position a little bit just because they kind of were forced to. They were allowing offenses to dictate terms. And this personnel group, not everybody on the defense like this, but quite a few guys are able to, move around a little bit. And you add like Demarius Randall to that as well. He's got a lot of experience at safety. Now at corner, I'm sure that they have ideas of being able to use him. I think that, he's had a good enough camp based on everything that you see and read, where I think he's probably a lock on the roster. What do you think?
Yeah, it does kind of seem that he has a leg up over a guy like Pierre Desir. And so you're going to see, Reed and Witherspoon be the starters. Amadi seems like he's kind of got the third corner, but he may not play as much because they're going to play three safeties a lot because of Blair. But he's kind of got that third corner spot nailed down.
You think?
Amadi does.
Do you think because they really have kind of interchanged Blair into that spot as well as playing some of the Adams role in the defense if Adams is off the field or whatever? So
yeah, and with Ryan Neal playing the way he is, yeah, I mean, they've just moved guys around and made it. They are playing a lot of three safety, and so that has been interesting. Another guy who I should probably bring up would be Ashari Crosswalk.
I was just going to mention him.
Yeah. He's a guy who I honestly wouldn't have given a shot at all into making the roster before going up to watch. And he's real comfortable in there. He's a free safety, does well on the back end, familiar with the cover three and his responsibilities, and just has that knack of kind of recognizing what's going on and getting that break towards where the play is going a step early, so that he can get there on time. He's not getting there, after the play has already been made by the offense. And so he was kind of fun to watch too. And honestly, he may be the backup free safety. Like, right now it's you'll think of it as Marquise Blair, but Blair they really want up in the box or in coverage. And so to have that, the person in the back end, I mean, you've got Amadi who could do it, but he doesn't get a lot of practice time there. And so Crosswell may be the guy, and he looked good in camp, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he makes the roster.
Yeah. Corbin Smith came out with with kind of a camp update that was out on video that I saw this morning. And he mentioned Crosswell specifically as a guy that he was impressed with and stood out a little bit in that group. And the other guy was, two guys, Trey Flowers and Randall, were also kind of frequently mentioned as having good camps so far. What did you get a chance to see Flowers? And does he kind of fit out there in this group?
Flowers made a couple of big plays. He like, and they kind of stacked in a row where it was like, it felt like Geno Smith was like trying to go after him, and Flowers was having none of it. And so it was like, so he was playing well, but of course, he's playing with the second group, right? So he was playing against Geno, and he was playing against some of the lesser known wide receivers, but he still looked good out there. I think Flowers looks like a guy that's going to make the roster as probably the fourth corner.
And then it comes down to Desir and Randall in your mind.
And I think Randall's got that job.
How about Trey Brown? We haven't talked about Trey Brown yet.
I didn't really see much of Trey Brown. I know he was out there, he was playing, whatever, but I just never saw him make a play. And that might just be, that's where the play went, and that kind of stuff. Or it might just be that he's learning and isn't quite at 100% speed yet. And so, yeah, I just didn't see him make any plays. And so he's a guy that I think is probably going to he'll make the roster. That's for certain. But whether or not he sees the field early in the season, I don't know. As the season progresses, I bet he'll play more and more.
He's a special teams guy. He liked to play special teams in college, made plays there. So he's just going to have to start with that and try to work himself in. Anybody else of note? Like, if you're going to watch the defensive backs, there are some drills where you're going to go up against wide receivers. Any wide receivers other than DK Metcalf that stood out to you? Obviously.
I can tell you a receiver who didn't that I expected him to, and that would have been Penny Hart. All the, when we did our live show up there, Corbin Smith raved about him and how much he's improved and looks like he's going to be a big impact guy. I didn't see him make a single catch
on that
day during the 11-on-11 drills.
And all you've heard since too, that time we've had a couple practices since then with pads and stuff, and his name's come up again as somebody that kind of had a big day.
So it might have just been that practice. The guy who showed quite a bit was John Ursula. Made us a couple of really tough catches over the middle. Had a couple catches where he would be able to get the ball down and then get down the sideline before getting touched because there are no pads, they're not tackling. Caught a touchdown. Just made a bunch of plays and looked good. They ran during the 11-on-11s. It was like 3rd and 21 or something because of a false start and a sack. And they ran basically a wide receiver screen to John Ursula, and he picked up like 16 yards. It wasn't enough for the first down, but it was a huge chunk of getting that back and getting them back in a field goal range type of thing. And so that was actually kind of fun. He was just a fun guy that was fun to watch. The other person who stood out really was Gerald Everett. Man, that guy looks smooth running and catching the ball. He looks like a natural receiver. And caught a touchdown from Wilson that was thrown kind of low. And so he had to like reach down about his knee and grab it. And you couldn't tell that it was like an awkward catch. It was just like, boom, there he got it. And he's still running. So very natural. Will Disley looked, he made a couple of plays that looked okay. Colby Parkinson was all over the place.
Those names just keep coming up. Like all three of those guys.
Yep. They're trying to get Parkinson the ball. He's lining up in the slot a lot. They're moving him around. And I want to say that dude is tall. And it shows up. I mean, he's out there on a field full of guys that are 6'2", 6'3", and then you see this helmet just above the rest of everybody else.
The only guys on the team that are as tall as him are the two tackles that are new to the team, Forsyth and the other undrafted rookie guy. I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah. But so Parkinson's tall. He kind of runs like a guy who's that tall. He looks like he's all knees at times. But
so he doesn't look smooth to you.
he doesn't look as smooth. I don't know if there's ever been anyone that tall who looks smooth. I mean, even if you think about like in basketball, guys like Tim Duncan and David Robinson don't look that smooth when they run. I guess you know, Kevin Durant, KD, does, but he's the
Yeah.
exception of the guy who's really tall who actually looks like a smooth runner.
Well, all you hear about Parkinson is like this guy's such a huge target. It's just huge red zone opportunities, kind of what we've talked about in the last 3 or 4 weeks, just talking about players, and that seems like it's kind of been reinforced during this camp.
Yeah, when they were doing red zone drills, they ran a couple of fades into the corner with him. Neither of which were caught. You can tell that he and Wilson still are figuring out where the ball needs placed and where he needs to get to. But it was pretty clear they want to do that, and they need to continue working on it and getting it right. But yeah, I mean, he stands out. He really does. He's just a mammoth guy, and I can't, he can catch the ball too, and he's got good hands. So at some point, he and Wilson are going to figure that out, and they're just going to be really, really tough to stop in that corner.
A couple people that are standing out in camp, according to reports, are the running back group: the Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, and DJ Dallas. Although yesterday, Alex Collins put the ball on the ground 2 different times, and it seems like that is why he didn't stick around the last time.
Yep.
So that's got to be a concern. I know that beyond that, he's having a really nice camp. So hopefully he can correct that. Of course, the offense yesterday was abysmal, according to Pete Carroll. And he doesn't say that very often, but he said, we got work to do on offense.
Well, they put the ball on the ground a lot. And that doesn't help. They also gave up a couple sacks, which, it's going to not make anybody happy. But when I was out there, the running backs looked good. Carson had a couple of really nice runs, but he also didn't get a lot of carries. They weren't working him hard. Collins had a couple of really nice ones, but the best running back on the field was DJ Dallas. He just looked.
Wow. That's terrific news, really.
So explosive and fast, and the defense was struggling to keep up with him at times, because it comes down to the difference between these inside zone, which is the type of running that we're used to seeing, and the outside zone, which is what they ran a lot of. They ran a lot of outside zone runs during practice, and Dallas looked good. He just looked straight up good.
So Penny Hart was talking to the media, and he talked about his role specifically, but it kind of transcended between his role as a wide receiver and who he is as a player, and a guy like DJ Dallas. It sounded like they were almost interchangeable in the way that Waldron was lining them up in different spots, and kind of the receiver out of the backfield thing. And with Penny Hart, he's going to be probably a guy that's going to be involved in some of those jet sweeps, along with Eskridge and so forth. What do you think about the fact that DJ Dallas and a guy like Penny Hart would be on the roster, and maybe Eskridge kind of in that role where they're moving those guys around a lot? Maybe some of it is disguise, as it progresses, but just using those guys, maybe even DK Metcalf and Lockett lined up in certain spots that we aren't quite used to seeing.
Oh no, that's awesome. And your point about them using Dallas, he wasn't just in the slot; he was on the outside. They moved him all over. He took runs out of the backfield. He'd start in the backfield, go in motion. He was a
running back in high school.
He's a running back in the pros.
Was he?
Dallas is. I'm talking about Dallas, not.
Oh, I was talking about Penny Hart. Yeah.
But yeah,
You're talking about Dallas moving all over the place.
Yeah, they were moving him all over. There were times he'd line up as the outside wide receiver and then motion into the slot. Other times he'd line up as the outside receiver and motion all the way into the backfield and then take a handoff. I mean, they literally would put him anywhere and motion him anywhere else.
Conditioning this year is going to have to be off the charts.
Yeah.
Really?
Because they're moving him all over, and he was playing a lot. I mean, this isn't we're not talking about a guy that like is out there with the 3s and 4s. He was out there with the starters. Granted, a lot of that was because Carson played very little.
Is that concerning to you at all? It seemed like they did that last year as well. And then, well, hold on. And then the season happened and they did the same thing.
Yeah.
So you end up with a guy that's your best running back, your monster, getting less than 200 carries on a season, or 200 and having 800 yards, where you could feed him a guy like that a little bit more, and he could have a larger impact on your win-loss total. I think
he'd have a larger impact over a fewer games because he's going to get hurt, and they want to have him out there when they need him. So they're gonna meter him. They're gonna keep him off the field and use his backups because they've got a deep running back room. And then in the fourth quarter, in the 4-minute offense, when they need to grind out a drive, he's going to be the guy who does it, and he's going to get them those 40 yards in the fourth quarter, or 50 yards in the fourth quarter that they need to run the clock out. And he's going to be available for that because they keep him metered.
Yeah, but I don't know that they have anybody else on the roster that's going to wear out a defense a little bit. I mean, maybe just from running, running around chasing guys, but not actually punishing hits.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But
I mean, you'd never say that with beast mode. You'd never say, well, we're going to meter him, all that kind of stuff. No, we're going to use him because we're going to punish people.
But he didn't get hurt. He was available. Carson plays 14 or 12 to 14 games a year. He misses time, and they don't want him. When they need him, they want him out there, and so that's what they're doing with him. And then they've got Penny and they've got Dallas, who both are they're different kinds of backs that will also give them yards. And the outside zone running game also makes the defensive linemen run more. They actually have to go, they move laterally, and there's just more ground for them to cover, and it tires them out. And so you're tiring guys out by making them run a lot rather than tiring them out by hitting them a bunch. It's just a different way of doing it.
So I would be completely remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about the offensive line. I don't know if you had a chance at all to see anybody do any drills,
individual drills and that, but once they got to the 11 on 11s, got a chance to watch them pretty good, and the defensive line as well. But I didn't watch any of the individual drills that they ran. So I'll tell you, the interior of the line looked good.
Posick wasn't out there.
Posick wasn't out there. Fuller was playing, and he looked, it was fine. There's also no pads, so they're not like the defenders aren't like really pushing because they can't, right? It's limited contact. Where the troubles came in was at right tackle, where both the guys that are competing over there at times struggled.
Shell and Abue.
Mm-hmm. And they struggled because Daryl Taylor is a beast.
Let's talk about the defense.
Because Daryl Taylor, he not only is he big and strong and whatever, but that guy moves so quick. He's got that bend to get around the corner. There was one play when they were doing 11 on 11s, and Gino was in there, and Taylor came around the edge so quick that he got to where Gino was before Gino hit the back of his drop. and he's not allowed to touch him because it's, training camp. He's wearing the red jersey. So he just gets up really close to him and starts dancing. And you're just like, wow, that would have been, if that had been a real play, Gino would have
probably would have jarred the ball loose.
Yeah, Gino would have gotten decapitated because he's coming around, and he's just he couldn't even hit the back of his drop.
Every time that Pete Carroll is asked in a press conference about Daryl Taylor, he is so consistent with his answer. It's like, yeah, Daryl Taylor showing up every day. He's playing the way that we want him to play. We're excited about him. He's looking great out there. No limitations. He's going to have a great impact this year. And I'm just like, wow, I'll take that every day.
Yeah. He looks fantastic. Again, no pads. Well, things will improve for the offensive linemen usually when they get pads. So there's a little bit more contact and that kind of stuff, but he was just so quick. And for a guy his size to be that quick is kind of scary. I will say that he was a pass rusher that day. When they were doing coverage drills where they had, the linebackers and defensive backs working together on their zones and their coverage and that kind of stuff. Taylor wasn't there. He was with the defensive lineman.
Did they put Cody Barton in there, or did they put a Blair in there, or Amadi?
Well, they rotated everyone through. It was hard to tell because it was just one of those drills where it was just the defensive backs and linebackers, and some of them put on a red thing over their helmet, and then they were the offensive player for that.
So did Daryl Taylor line up in the Leo spot?
He did
the 5 tech.
He did some in the Leo spot. He saw some in the 5 tech. There were times when they were doing in the 11-on-11s where he was playing linebacker, but on every single time where he was a linebacker, he rushed the passer. He never dropped back in a coverage.
Did he do that? I'm just curious. Did he do that? Did he kind of stunt inside on those, or did he spend most of his time just completely outside?
Oh, he did everything. They did stunts where he
so
came
exciting.
in, they ran around the edge.
How big is this player this year? I mean, is he being looked at in this defense as a key cog to make this entire thing work?
I think he is, and he looks like he's ready for it.
Crazy, yeah.
Again, no pads. We'll see.
So Alden Smith, same sort of player, same sort of role. Are they honestly, option number 1, option number 2?
I didn't see much of Alden Smith. As much as Daryl Taylor was easily seen and he stood out and made plays, I kind of forgot Alden Smith was there. So, we'll see.
Another player, Robert Gamdichi. Did you notice Robert Gamdichi?
No, but apparently he was dealing with, was it a hamstring or something? And so he practiced some and then sat out a bunch. And they're kind of working on him with that.
Heard nothing but good things with him, though.
Rasheen Green made a couple of plays I was kind of like, where did this come from? Because, for 3 years, he's been all potential and no production.
He's forgotten. I don't even know. So, I mean, when you look at the roster, when you look at the who's going to make it and who's not going to make it, God, he is just on that bubble. There's just no getting around it, especially if Gamdichi and Alden Smith make this roster. I don't know if there's a way that he gets here unless like a guy like Benson Mayo is gone. And you almost need Benson Mayo because you want to have specific guys in specific roles. And Benson really fills that, that speed rush thing. Whereas Rasheen Green, he'd have to get in there as opposed to like Collier. I just don't see that happening. But again, unless they get him to flip somebody to flip a pick for him or something, he could be on the outside.
It's hard to see a spot for him. And I'm not even counting Alden Smith. It's just hard to find. There's so many players and that have to make this roster. That
Is the team going to look at Alden Smith as a linebacker? Like Taylor at strong side?
Yeah. He is Daryl Taylor light.
So what happens if that is the case? Do you end up keeping 6 linebackers then this year? And then what happens to your safety group? You know what I mean? It's like
we have a 53-man roster show for
a
reason.
Right.
Because these questions are hard. They really are, because you look at them and you go, okay, if you keep Alden Smith as a linebacker, he's your 6th linebacker, but he's also a defensive end. So does that give you flexibility to let a guy like Rasheen Green go, since you've got Smith who can play both? Or do you take a safety? Well, if you take out a safety, you're already looking at Ryan Neal, Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, Marquise Blair making the roster. And if Ashari Crosswell is going to make the roster too, now you're at 5 with just the safeties. And
I think that you'd end up having to keep, but you'd have to make a decision like keeping Demarius Randall, which I think you keep anyway, but you know that Demarius Randall can play some safety if needed. And so you end up with a guy like Crosswell on the practice squad.
Yeah, maybe.
And like the linebacker situation, you're going to have Cody Barton. I understand he's having a great camp. Daryl Taylor, Brooks Wagner, those are all locks. Then you've got Burkervin, and then you've got Alden Smith that are right there if in that linebacker group, quote unquote. And then on the defensive end side, combined with the defensive tackles, that's the hardest. That's going to be the hardest cuts, I think, in all of camp.
And it comes down to like, okay, Burkervin is a special teams ace. I mean, let's face it, he doesn't have a role on the defense. But what he does have is some fantastic special teams production. And you've also got, your fullback, Nick Ballore, who does nothing but special teams. Although he's played linebacker the last couple of days at practice, I understand, because he was a linebacker for a while, and then now he's a fullback. But really, it's just a spot on the roster for him, so that way he can go be your special teams captain and be awesome at that.
So who are the bubble players?
Well, I'm just saying, like, when you have guys like Burkervin and Ballore that don't have a role outside of special teams, do they take up they take up a spot? Or how many of those guys do you want taking up a spot?
Well, we've certainly seen that in the past where the team has selected to keep Griffin in that similar than Burkervin role over, other players that you thought maybe had a chance. I'm just looking at the roster going, okay, it's cut day. You've got Benson Mayowa, Rasheen Green, Alton Robinson, Ben Burkervin, maybe like a guy like Robert Gamdichi even, or Brian Monet, right? Are you going to keep 4 defensive tackles or just 3? And then have one of your defensive ends be a guy that can rotate inside once in a while? Those are the decisions they're going to have to make. So at least one of those guys is going to have to get cut.
Yeah.
I think Rasheen Green, I mean, I would try to get a pick for him out of that group because he's already duplicated on the roster quite a bit.
Well, and you didn't even mention Cedric Lattimore, who the coaches love.
They love him.
And at times, like, you could see, like, he has some explosiveness to him. Again, no pads in practice.
Right.
But it was there. And so, yeah, I mean, there's talent here who can play, should be on an NFL roster, not on a practice squad, but on an actual 53-man roster. That's not going to make this team. I think it's going to come down to a choice of Mayowa and Green. One of those 2 guys will make the roster.
And they're 2 completely different players.
True.
It's going to really show you who they value, like which position they value the most.
Maybe, because you've also got guys, Taylor, Dunlap, even Smith, maybe Alton Robinson, who can play both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can swap back and forth. And so
that tells you everything you need to know right there about Rasheen Green, doesn't it?
yeah, because Rasheen Green plays on the one side.
And Benson Mayo has probably got more value. It's hard because Rasheen Green can stop the run as well. He can set the edge, and he does his flash moments. And so Benson Mayo is a one-trick pony, and he's going to have limited snap rolls. A guy like Green could come in and start for you and hold down the fort for weeks if needed, if Collier was injured or whatever.
Assuming that Green stays healthy, which has been the biggest problem for him. I think we would see Rasheen Green in a much different light if he had been healthy more over the last 3 seasons.
So nobody's going back to your original topic, defensive backs. It's always been assumed this offseason that DJ Reed was going to come in and hold down the fort on one side. I don't really hear very much going on about him, positive or negative. I think that he's doing his job. I think there was a couple quotes out there yesterday about him returning kicks or punts, and the team was kind of trying to figure that out. I'm not exactly sure if that makes sense or not, because there's a few other guys I'd probably rather have returning kicks and punts than my starting outside boundary corner. But what do you think about DJ Reed? Did you notice him? Did he stand out at all? Did he make any plays?
I did notice him. He just the jokes earlier about Parkinson standing out because he's like super tall. You remember DJ Reed's not.
He's like 5'8" or 9, right?
Yeah, he's like 5'9". That was always been the knock on him. He's just not a tall guy. He's not a big guy, but he's really sticky in coverage, and does that sort of stuff well. Made some plays as far as like, getting up on the ball and that kind of stuff. But really, what it came down to is the person he was covering was rarely open, so they weren't throwing at him. Whereas with Witherspoon, yeah, the person he was covering was rarely open, but his person he was covering was also DK Metcalf. And so Wilson would throw to a covered Metcalf anyway. And so Witherspoon had more chances to make plays and show. And Reed didn't, because they just didn't throw at him. So I think he was making plays. He wasn't, there were no big spectacular plays. He just did his job and did it right, did it well. And honestly, as your second corner, I'm okay with that. I will say that that job is not as set in stone as we would have thought a month ago.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Because the person who's pushing him is Flowers.
Wow. Because you've already assigned Akela Witherspoon to a starting role, that is not going to be in question. He's already done enough.
I don't look, from what I saw, not just his play that day, but also the way that they were using him and the way that they were rotating him on to Metcalf, and letting and adjusting the defense assignments in order for let him to come across the field to the other side to follow Metcalf around. That told me that he's the number one guy, and they see him as that. He's
Pierre Desir, Flowers, and Witherspoon are the only guys with size that could cover guys like DK. And there's quite a few now in the league that are, have size and speed.
Now there's some of those guys in our division. I think they've got, Nuke Hopkins and who is a tall guy, and then AJ Green, who doesn't run like he used to, but is still big. Both of them in Arizona. I mean, you're gonna need your taller guys, and so Flowers is a guy that I know fans won't love that because he's not the most popular player, but he looked good. He was pushing.
How do you cover guys like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel in San Francisco? Like you've got to have two guys that are really tight.
Yeah, you have You have DJ Reed in there.
And Witherspoon, you said, is just tight in coverage.
Oh, he looked so good. He looked like he could handle, like he looked like a definite starter. And honestly, you've also got Ugo Amadi. And
eventually Trey Brown. I mean, he might not be effective in game 4 or whatever we faced the 49ers fairly early in the season, but that second game,
yeah, early
a guy
December.
like that could have an impact, because Deebo Samuel's a physical beast, if he can stay healthy, which he has a problem doing. Anybody else on the roster you want to talk about, or coaching or scheme stuff that you saw that was interesting? I know that you've mentioned a little bit about how they move around a ton. We haven't seen Adams out there at all, which is tough, but
yeah, I would just say that they rotated around, they mixed up their coverages. This is not the Legion of Boom. We're going to play cover 3 on every play. It's going to look the same, and it doesn't matter that you know what we're doing, because we're better at it than you are at whatever you're going to do. This isn't that. They have guys moving around. Like I said, you have Ryan Neal was in there, and one play he was back as a deep safety. The next play he was up in press coverage one-on-one with a wide receiver. The play after that, he was covering a slot. I mean, it was literally guys moving around doing all sorts of everything. And it wasn't just Neal. Blair was doing that. And you had Diggs, end up in various spots. Not quite as dynamic as, the other two guys, but, doing that sort of thing. And it just worked.
So if there's a position group on the, that you like the most other than the offensive line, it's got to be the defensive backs, because you kind of get into it and sink into it a little bit and really kind of provide some good analysis there. My curiosity.
I really like the versatility that they have with the 3 safeties I've mentioned, and Randall and Amadi, and even Flowers, who was a college safety. They move people around. They're not afraid to mix things up. And as long as the communication's good, so they're not making
let's talk about that. Let's talk about the communication aspect and Quandre Diggs, because we don't talk about Quandre Diggs at all, but he just ends up being in the right spot quite a bit and making plays on the ball and being there, tipping passes himself. He just seems to be in the right spot all the time. And he's the guy that's really calling that back end. We haven't seen Adams, but from what I understand about what Ken Norton has said about Adams this year is they're going to use him in more of a traditional role as opposed to scheming him into the backfield as much as he did last year, because I think we have the personnel to now kind of be a better rounded team, at least going into the season, barring any injuries. So it'll be interesting to see how they incorporate him into this defense, which seems like it's young and hungry again, and sort of kind of had a little bit of swagger that I'm kind of noticing a little bit.
A little bit. And I would say that he's going to fit in doing what Blair and Ryan Neal are. And they're going to move him around, but not just blitz him, which is what they did a lot of last year at the end of the year, because they had to. It was the only way they were getting sacks and pressure. And so instead they're going to move him around. He's going to be doing all sorts of stuff in the secondary and with the linebackers and mixing things up. It's going to be really hard for opposing quarterbacks to know what Seattle's doing.
So there was a piece put out, and gosh darn it if I can't remember, maybe but you've been pretty busy, don't expect you to, but there was a thing came out yesterday, an NFC, I think it was an NFC roundup, maybe it was an entire NFL thing, where they basically didn't have Seattle's defense in the top 20. And just based on last year, where the team started really slow and then came on and was ranked 15th, I think a lot of folks are just kind of seeing Seattle as being ranked 15th. And then they see guys like KJ Wright moving on, and Dunbar, who didn't really do anything, but they see that he was a starter. And then Griffin is gone. and they think that the defense has taken a step back.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they wrong, and why are we kind of have a little bit better insight as to actually what's going on? Or could we be wrong? And could this entire thing being hinged on quote unquote potential, which is Daryl Taylor and Hyder working out, and maybe a guy like Gamdichi coming in? And are we depending on Alden Smith to have a role in order for this defense to really be what we think it is? Or is it just going to be really good?
The thing is that Smith and Gamdichi can't earn playing time, but they're not linchpins on what this defense does. The reason why I think that the national media has it wrong and the local media is much higher on Seattle is that we see the defense that was like third in the league for the last 7 or 8 games, and first in the league in sacks over that time. And we look at that as more of a jumping off point than the team that was giving up the historically bad number of yards and stuff in the first 6 games. And so it's all about the comparison of the Seahawks defense reputation because of the first 6 games last year is that they're just pathetic, and that that they just don't give credit. There's no credit given to once everyone got healthy and the scheme got figured out a little bit and everything got better. There's no credit being given to that. And then
what role did the offenses that we faced have in that?
Some. I mean, you can't say that it's not, but
you could still easily say that we're a top 10 defense.
Yeah,
and top 10 kind of going into this season.
Yeah, and you look at so they lost Dunbar, which what we saw last year was addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
The defense got better when they finally sat him down and was like, no, you're done. Your knee is not going to get any better, so go away. And Griffin was a nice, steady guy out there, but he was inconsistent and gave up some deep balls. And honestly, they replaced him with Witherspoon, and I actually think that's it's at least a lateral move.
It's at least a lateral move. I mean, we really do need to see him in this defense, but so far in his career, I would say it's lateral or slightly less than, even though I wasn't really a Griffin fan, especially in this defense. It just didn't work to me. Mm-hmm. Witherspoon's a much better fit for what the team tries to do on the boundaries.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like that. They're getting Blair back. He didn't really play last year because the injury. They're getting him back. They're getting, Daryl Taylor acclimated, and he's basically like getting a first round, having a first round pick.
Dunlap for the entire season. Harry Hyder, Alton Robinson entering his second season.
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, and then Jordan Brooks. I know that seeing KJ Wright leave is one of those things, but KJ Wright didn't have the speed, and he didn't run as well as he used to, and was at times a liability when he was at weak side linebacker. Now, when they moved him to strong side, he did great, and he was fantastic. But Jordan Brooks is the weak side linebacker over there, and his play speed is much, much faster. His coverage ability, when it comes to down the field a little bit more, if the play goes on longer, is much better, just because he's got the speed to do it. And so I don't know if losing KJ matters as much as people want to think that it does, because you're going to get an improvement just because he's in his second year out of Brooks, and you're going to get the stuff against the run that Daryl Taylor is going to bring at the strong side linebacker spot. And then, when they run nickel, which they're going to run nickel a lot this year, KJ wouldn't have been on the field anyway. Even if it was here, he'd be off because he's the strong side linebacker.
Well, I don't want to disparage KJ because he gave his whole entire NFL career to us, but he ended up, at the end, he's kind of a one-trick pony, and it's a really good trick, which is blowing up screens, and everything else, he's kind of a chase linebacker, which is okay.
He's really good at blowing up screens, and he was also he's good against the run.
Well, he's good. No, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying that was his thing, and he did it really well. And then I think that he was a pretty decent linebacker overall. Obviously, he's got superior cognitive ability in that defense, where the anticipation transcends his slower end play speed at this point. He's got great length. He uses that to his advantage quite a bit. I'm not saying, I would love to have him back on the defense for just those skill sets. Even if he was to take a much reduced role, say he only ended up playing 30% of the snaps or whatever, as opposed to 85 or 90, I still think the team would benefit from having a guy like that, especially at the cost that it would take to get him on the team. I don't understand, but then again, you look at the roster, Keith, we've already cut a whole bunch of guys that clearly are going to be on somebody's team.
If you have a chance to bring KJ back and cut Alden Smith, do you do it? I think you do. Because you don't really, Alden Smith is basically there as a hedge against a Daryl Taylor injury. And that's what he brings. Whereas.
Yeah, but, he does have the ability to play 5-tech, and so you do have that sort of backup role there where you could have an edge setter, a guy that could really have an impact on rushing the passer if necessary. We've got a ton of guys, but that's such a key position that I think that he ends up playing a bigger role than I think that we have established for him right now. I just don't know exactly how that turns out.
Yeah. So I think you're looking at, does this defense take a step back from the end of last year? Sure.
You think?
They're not going to be the third best defense in the NFL.
Why not? What if we end up getting to the passer right away? Which really is disruptive.
To me, the only way that happens is if Gamdichi just blows up and is amazing.
I agree. Because I think he's a bigger cog in this thing than we think.
But if he doesn't, then it's probably a top 10 defense, somewhere around 10 to 12. It's good defense. It's not a bad defense. And for them to not be in the top 20 doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the talent is, especially the depth is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it was like Shield or somebody that wrote that, which was a little surprising to me.
Yeah,
given his insight. But the thing about Gamdichi is, when you really kind of look at it and way everything is supposed to work together, Gamdichi's role is huge. Or a guy like Gamdichi. So you take a look at Lattimore. Brian Monet's probably not the same player, but he would end up having the same role. Al Woods, those are kind of all interchangeable, but Gamdichi's the guy that could really have a impact on collapsing the pocket from the interior. And I'm here for it because I think that would make the defense. I really do. I do think that we're easily top 10. I think that we could be top 5 if our pass rush is number 1. Like if we have the best pass rush in the league, that means that everything else is working really well. We've got enough guys there in the middle with like Jamal Adams and Brooks and Blair and Bobby Wagner and others to be able to really kind of clog things up there where teams aren't really being successful in converting third downs like they have been in the past. And the back end is the back end. I want to see it before I really but it's promising, especially what you had to say about Witherspoon. I think if Witherspoon comes through in the way that we're talking about him, and pair that with DJ Reed, and then you've got Flowers performing and Demarius Randall out there is fairly steady. And then Trey Brown coming on mid season, that could be a really good group. I think that it could definitely be top 5. Now, the question is, Keith, top 5 offense, I think that we're going to have that. I don't necessarily think it's a given. I just know it's true. And the top 5 defense, top 7, I don't know that it's beyond top 10. Like that seems unrealistic. I think it's in the top 10 discussion. Is that a Super Bowl winning team?
You get top 10 offense, top 10 defense. Yeah. That's you have both. You're a team that makes a deep run in the playoffs. And then, it all comes down to the breaks.
It all comes down to Jason Myers. Maybe. And I understand he's having a great camp.
He is having a great camp.
Yeah, great last name too.
Yeah, perfect last name. You know who also had a great day at camp? Tyler Ott.
God, it's, now we're mentioning him 2 or 3 times a year, which is, his press coverage is outstanding.
Yeah, we are the only ones mentioning. For those of you listening that don't understand the reference, he's the long snapper and a guy who you only talk about when he's terrible. But luckily, the Seahawks have a good long snapper, so we talk about him just so that it's not where his name comes up only when he's bad. But so
That's funny. Yeah, it's interesting. Earlier, you mentioned John Ursula. I know that there's a lot of guys out there, that really are kind of following him. It's his third season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's kind of forgettable so far.
He's got one catch, and it was a big one down at the 1 yard line against San Francisco that led to a win. But yeah, no, that's it. He's the guy that looked good. Honestly, he looked sharp and ready to contribute.
I heard Cade Johnson made a couple plays in one practice, but that's the only mention I've heard of Cade Johnson so far. I know there's folks that are kind of interested in him as an undrafted guy.
He didn't stand out to me, and I wanted him to. He's a guy that I liked his college tape. I think he can be good.
A guy that's interesting that plays a very similar role. And if you watched any of the Stanford tape, like I went and tried to watch some tape for Kobe Parkinson. And part of that, I saw Connor Weddington out there and noticed Connor Weddington as being a guy that's kind of that underneath receiver out of the slot that kind of just catches dump offs and all that kind of stuff that has the potential to create after the catch. A guy like that, possibly over Cade Johnson. Now, Cade has been productive in college and so forth, but in a Division II type environment, right? So it'd be interesting. Be interesting to see what that 5th or 6th wide receiver.
Yeah, it'll come down to special teams, right? I mean, if you're the 6th wide receiver, it's going to come down to who's the better special teams player.
Do you think they carry 6?
Yeah,
or 7? They've carried 7 before. I just don't see that. I almost see the tight end group having 4 as opposed to the wide receivers having 7.
Yeah, I could see Tyler Mabry making it over a guy like Weddington. Because of the fact that he was out there on special teams drills as a blocker in field goal stuff, as an outside blocker / get down the field and make a tackle guy on punts. He was out there as not the outside guy that usually you see getting around the corner to make the block on a field goal, but as the 3rd or 4th guy in from the edge that gets up the field and jumps. They had him there. And so, yeah, they've got guys that, I mean, he's got a role. And so it's like, okay, can you fit him in? Like, where does he go? Where does he fit? And I think that, Mabry offers them special teams flexibility that maybe a guy like Weddington doesn't, because do you want to have 2 guys the size of Penny Hart as your
I mean, the only way I think that Weddington makes the team this right out of the gate is if he happened to be picked to return punts or kicks or something like that, which is possible. I mean, he could be that dynamic guy and we just don't know it. I mean, he did that in college, so we'll see. We'll end the show. I got 2 guys I want to talk about. Gabe Jackson and Damian Lewis. Did you have it, or Stone Forsythe? Do you have a chance to see those guys at all? And is Stone Forsythe as big of a mountain as he looks like in pictures?
Okay, so Forsythe is bigger than Dwayne Brown. He's taller, he's longer. But as far as actually getting a chance to really dive into his play, I didn't get a chance to, in part because lack of pads makes it hard. And then they ran the drill, their one-on-one drills down away from where I was at when I was focusing on the defensive backs. And so I didn't really get a good chance to look at those guys. But when it came time to running the the 11 on 11s, no pads, but all three looked fine. They had Forsyth playing exclusively on the left side, from what I saw, not on the right. And
I like that actually.
And he did his job. The problems with the pass rush came from the right tackle position. And so, well, that'll tell you a little bit about.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can get that figured out a little bit. Yeah. Everything that I'm hearing from Pete, like repeatedly, he brings it up even sometimes without being asked. Cedric Aboué. He's going to get his chance. We had a great meeting at the end of, when on the exit interviews. And he told Cedric that he was going to give him a chance because he felt like he made a mistake last year by not allowing him to really compete for that spot. And Pete's damn serious about it because he's mentioned it many times. And it sounds like they're almost interchangeable in practice with the number ones. Mm-hmm. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, because does Brandon Shell have the diversity to be that swing tackle, or is he just a right tackle? And what does that do to the roster when they come down to making cuts?
Well, if he is just a right tackle, they either have to be okay with Forsyth coming in if Brown gets hurt.
Yeah, that's exactly what that means.
Or they would bring Shell in at right tackle and swing Aboué over from being.
That's what they would do. That's what they would do, isn't it, Keith? That's what they did last year, I think.
They would do that, maybe not in game, and move him back and forth in the middle of a game. Like they'd try and finish the game with either Shell or Forsyth at left tackle. But then once they get into practice and can make that adjustment, they'd move Aboué over. I think that would be the long-term plan.
Interesting.
So the other things that I would have said is that I don't know why Danny Etling's out there.
He's gone now.
That's what I said. He and Geno Smith when they were warming up, were just throwing. They were both of them practicing, throwing on the run, like if they're running to their left and then throwing with the right hand, right? So it's across their body. And they were just throwing at the width of the field. And, Geno was able to do it and get it all the way over there with no problem. And Etling literally couldn't get the ball across the field at all. Like he just had nothing on the arm. Just couldn't get. I was like, why is he on an NFL roster? And then
the next day,
yeah. And then, and also when they ran, the team drills, like Alex McHugh got, he got his snaps as the third string guy, and Etling didn't get a single one. And then the next day it was gone. And they brought in Sean Mannion. So, and Mannion's a guy who knows the offense because he was the backup in LA. So he knows what Waldron's trying to do and that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, and Mannion's, and now Pete, it's funny, on Sunday, Pete came out literally before Mannion even landed at his first practice. And he said, Mannion's coming in, to take some snaps, but he's not competing with Geno Smith for the second spot. And I thought, God, it'd be tough, to be a quarterback facing that immediately. It's like, you're just there to be a body, and a guy that knows the offense, that can help out, can help translate plays and so forth real time on the field and in the huddle and so forth. It's interesting, but Mannion's not a slouch. He's just not a starting caliber quarterback, but he's had that backup role in with the Rams, and then the last 2 years in Minnesota behind Cousins. So he does have that really good experience. He'd be kind of a guy that's a shadow roster guy at, beyond training camp, just to, in case something happened.
If something happened and they needed a quarterback, he would be the first guy they'd call, type of thing. He also is a guy that is looking for another shot, right? He's looking for another team to say, hey, we need a backup quarterback who's out there. And so he's going to get an opportunity in Seattle to come and get some preseason snaps and have there be some film on him. Mm-hmm. So that way, if, backup quarterback in, pick a team. The Eagles goes down.
Indianapolis. I
and
was going to say Carson Wentz comes to mind.
Yeah, or actually, I was thinking more. What popped into my head was, if they trade Minshew from Indianapolis or from Jacksonville to Indianapolis, so he could go be their starter, that they're going to need a backup, and so Sean Mannion could land.
The other spot that's really interesting right now is that apparently the Philadelphia Eagles and the Houston Texans are in deep discussions right now on a trade that would bring Watson to the Eagles, and I assume ship Hurts out, but that would make the Eagles instantly much better. But who knows, right? Who knows how much mental baggage stuff is going on with that deal? I know that the Eagles aren't a desired club to kind of go to right now, especially if you're a quarterback. But it would be a much better deal for the Eagles going forward to have Watson in there.
I'm surprised that Denver's not in on that.
Denver's got
Bridgewater and Locke, but they don't like either one of them. And they've got
a good roster too. They've got a defense and a good enough offense where if they had a decent quarterback, they would probably get into as a wild card. Mm-hmm. And with Locke, you just don't know. And so you're right there. Yep. So you're right. I mean, they could have an improvement there right away. Make them a contender right away, I think, if you had Watson in there.
Yeah. So, and then they are the ones that if things fell apart with, in Green Bay, they were going to jump on the Aaron Rodgers train and do whatever it took to get him in. Mm-hmm. I think with Watson, because of his legal problems, everyone's a little more leery. I mean, the talent's obviously there, but it's going to be one of those things where anything that you do, if you're going to trade them, say you trade 2 first-round picks, both of those picks have got to be conditional on, does he get suspended? Because if he gets suspended, now let's say he gets suspended for 4 games, one of those first becomes a second. If it becomes 8 games, one of those first becomes a third. If it becomes the whole season, then one of those firsts becomes
nothing.
The second first becomes a fifth, type of thing, where you end up your compensation ends up going way down if he doesn't play. I think that's the only way that a deal gets done.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's the real interesting thing. I saw, 2 sources last night, late, like 11 something, come out and confirm this conversation happening between teams. And so it'll be interesting to see if something happens today, because it would need to happen fairly soon if they want him to kind of get into the offense and be able to be ready for week 1. So I think we're done. I think we had a great show. It's good talking to you. We covered a lot of stuff. Thank you for going to training camp for the Seahawks Playbook podcast, Keith, and being the correspondent on the ground.
That was, it was a blast to go up and see practice, and it's always fun to do that because I learn way more for the day or 2 that I get to go up and actually be at practice than I do watching any of the live stream stuff. Like the rest of training camp, like the actual being there matters.
So talk to me just real quick. How was being there really matters? Just being with other people that are like fans.
Okay. That was cool too. Like everyone there was in Seahawk gear and they'd cheer at a big play. And it was like, hey, this is football again. Unlike last year with empty stadiums it was definitely, having that energy was fun. I
just hope it lasts, because this Delta variant thing, don't want to get into too much of that stuff, but nonetheless, my wife's company is just started traveling again in May, the end of May, June. And they just yesterday announced that they're going to stop. They're going to put a moratorium on company travel, and they're going to wait this thing out. So It's, who knows? Could end up being just like it was last year. And we're only a month away. And they've already sold tickets and they've already announced we're going to have crowds, all that kind of stuff. But this thing's serious enough where it could have the impact that we all don't want to see could actually happen. And I'd hate to see that. It would just suck, but it is what it is.
You know how to avoid that?
Yeah, I absolutely know.
Everybody go get your vaccination.
Absolutely.
If everyone gets their vaccination, it shuts this thing down and we don't have to worry about it anymore. Because there's fewer transmissions, and yes, it's possible for a breakthrough infection, but you won't get super sick, which you might if you don't have it. And if you aren't exposed because everyone else also got theirs, then there's going to be a lot fewer of the breakthrough transmissions. So just go get your vaccine, people.
Yeah.
I want to go to football games.
I know. That's what it's about.
Do it for me.
Yeah.
Do it for me.
It's our freedom. It's our freedom to go to a game.
Do it as a personal favor for me, because if you all go get your vaccines, then I can go watch the team play.
Yeah, that's what it's really about. In fact, that's what the message should be out there. This isn't a political thing. It's all about football. Come on, people.
Yep. Get it done.
All right. Find us on Twitter at Hawks Playbook. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NWChawk. And the show has a website, and we like the website. We wish everyone would go visit, and I think you would really like it. It's SeahawksPlaybook.com. All the major podcast platforms have us out there, as well as our own YouTube channel, which go subscribe. Be one of the very first ones to subscribe, because I think it's just going to be huge. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Next week, we are going to be talking about the scrimmage. So we're going to have a little bit of football to talk about, where there's some live action that we can comment on. And then we're previewing the first preseason game. We're going to be at the Raiders next weekend, so a week from this coming Saturday. And then we'll have real stuff to talk about, real games, real action.
The Raiders or Denver for the first one?
I'm pretty sure it's the Raiders.
I had that wrong in my head.
August something or other. I'm trying to keep up with it all. It is the Raiders. We have a preseason game preview show scheduled for August 10th, which I think means that the game, I think, is August
14th.
5th.
Saturday the 14th.
14th, yes. August 14th. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say, I had those two games flipped in my head.
Yeah, they're both the same. Raiders, Broncos. We don't like them. But
no, old rivals.
Right. All right. Let's talk next week. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWChawk. Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.